Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. I don't know if you're like me, but many are suffering from post-election stress syndrome, whatever that is. You were here covering it last night.
Yeah, we were on the CBN News Channel till 11 midnight last night. It was a great night, a lot of excitement.
Well, I'm sure. I want to give a shout-out to ABC. They did a superb job. They had Chris Christie on. They had Donna Brazile on. They had people who really knew what they're talking about, and a beautiful set. I don't know if it was electronic set or what it was, but it was really fantastic. So congratulations to ABC. You did real well. It seemed like Fox was hung up on their technology. They had so much technology, they weren't quite getting the points across.
Sometimes it's better just keep it simple. People just want results.
They had a whole bunch of new stuff, and it didn't work. But anyhow, gratefully, the midterms are over, and what was called the blue wave never really materialized. Republicans not only kept control of the Senate, they actually gained seats, as we forecast. And Wendy?
That's right. But Democrats did take control of the House of Representatives. And as Gary Lane reports, it was a wild election night with many races much closer than expected.
While many races are still too close to call, the blue wave Democrats had hoped for failed to materialize. It was more of a blue trickle. Republicans expanded their majority in the U.S. Senate, but lost control of the House of Representatives. With tallies out west still coming in, Democrats added at least 26 seats. In Florida, Congressman Ron DeSantis narrowly won his race for governor. Most polls showed leftist Democrat Andrew Gillum ahead in that race. And outgoing Republican Governor Rick Scott narrowly defeated Senator Bill Nelson. Faith and Freedom Coalition Chairman Ralph Reed said evangelical voters made the difference in Florida.
I think the White House and the RGA and the National Republican Senatorial Committee and certainly Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott are very grateful tonight that the rapture didn't happen before early voting began, because if it had, they would have lost in a landslide. And the evangelicals delivered this vote in a big way.
In Tennessee, the GOP held Bob Corker's open seat, which will be filled by Republican Marsha Blackburn. She beat Phil Bredesen by 9 points. Out west, incumbent Republican Senator Dean Heller lost in Nevada, but former Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney trounced his opponent in Utah. He's now headed to the U.S. Senate. In Texas, voters showed you can't always buy elections. In a squeaker, Republican Senator Ted Cruz beat back a green wave of out-of-state Democrat money. Challenger Beto O'Rourke raised nearly $70 million.
This was an election about hope and about the future, and the people of Texas rendered a verdict that we want a future with more jobs and more security and more freedom.
Some incumbent Democrats who voted against the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court were defeated. In North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp lost her re-election bid. Indiana's Joe Donnelly is out. And Josh Hawley beat Claire McCaskill by 6% in Missouri. Hawley gave credit where credit is due.
Tonight, the good Lord and the people of Missouri have given us the victory. We won.
And there were some firsts in this midterm election. More women than ever before. Possibly as many as 100 will now serve in the House of Representatives. Among them, another first, 2 Muslims. With Democrats now preparing for control of the House, still to be decided is if Nancy Pelosi will return to her role as House Speaker. Pelosi said Democrats will make their top campaign issue, health care, a priority.
Democrats will lower health care costs and prescription drug prices for seniors and families across America.
Democrats have also pledged to launch committee investigations of President Trump and his administration. And they'll possibly begin impeachment proceedings against both the president and Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Now, with a divided Congress ahead, still to be determined if the president and Democrats and Republicans will work together, or if Washington will be more contentious and polarized than during President Trump's first 2 years. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. You know, the one issue that seemed to be weighing against Republicans, especially the House members, was health care, because they had gotten a tax cut, but the amount of money in a tax cut for an individual voter was not as much as the potential of losing their health coverage. And what the Republicans had run on very hard before was to repeal and replace Obamacare. They lost because of the vote of John McCain. All right, John McCain died of brain cancer. He's replaced by a man who's a staunch conservative. They have enough votes, and it seems like to me, if the smart thing to do would just say, okay, you're concerned about health care, we are concerned about health care, and what we're going to do, we've got the House, and we've got the Senate, and we've got the White House, and there's no reason that we can't call a special session, call the Congress back into session. I think that's going to happen in the Senate anyhow, and we could have the Speaker, Ryan, call the House back into session and repeal Obamacare, and then the House, I'm sure they've got bills already set up that they can put through, and the Senate votes and the President signed it into law, and suddenly you've got people covered that they're looking for, and that takes away from the Democrats a major, major issue. Now, whether they'll do something like that, I have no idea, but it's certainly possible. They have the votes, and then once that's in, the Democrats of the Senate couldn't possibly overturn because they'd have to pass the Senate and get it through a presidential veto, and they couldn't do it. Okay, that's my take, and that's, if anybody's listening, it might be a gimmick, but it might be a good one. The other thing it looks like the Republicans should do is stop the Mueller investigation. The election's over. It's time to get that out of the way. And who knows, but you certainly don't want to leave that alone when you've got Jerry Nadler running the Judiciary Committee. And can you believe some of the other people who will be committee chairman? It's going to be something. All right. John Waggi gave us a brilliant analysis, and his crystal ball lies shattered at his feet. John, what happened?
First, Pat, I'm going to say what pundits almost never say, at least on the air. I was wrong. I really did think, and you mentioned the health care issue, which was very potent throughout the country for Democrats running for the House. And I really thought that they'd give the Republicans more credit for trying. The Republican House did pass repeal. It was, as you said, in the Senate where it faltered, and I didn't know or believe that they would punish House members that much. And also, I think it was a way to get back at President Trump for a lot of people who didn't want to see the results of 2016.
You felt that whole the House, it really wasn't a blue wave, it's a blue trickle. Ultimately, how many seats now did they switch? You know?
Well, it's in the neighborhood of it's over 30, and so it's you know, it's more like a stream. Maybe not a trickle, maybe not a wave, but it's probably a stream.
All right.
And so, you know, the count is still going up, and there are still several seats that are being counted, as always happens every 2 years. But, you know, roughly 228 Democrats, 207 Republicans at this point. You know, so.
Well, that's not a wave. But it's a substantial.
Yeah, it's a substantial victory for the Democrats, and now Washington's going to have to recalculate. The White House has to recalculate about how they do all these things. And I was very interested in what you mentioned about the health care thing, because one thing it would do for President Trump, that was something he ran on, and he could say, you know, this is another campaign promise fulfilled if they could manage to herd all those cats at the same time.
I think the House has already got they've got the legislation all laid out. All they got to do is just repass what they've already passed, send it to the Senate, and with Mitch McConnell in charge of that, and they say, look, you know, why not? Let's get this thing through. President signed it, and the Democrats in the House couldn't overturn it. Then it'd be locked.
If they could get the replace done along with the repeal.
Got to do that. You can't take one away without the other. All right, let's talk about the Senate. How many seats? They lost Nevada, which you were counting on holding, but Marsha Blackman just really swept Bradeston in Tennessee. It was an amazing victory for that lady.
Yes, and Ted Cruz was able, as Gary reported, to hold on in Texas, and and of course the incumbent in Nevada, it's still he's gone down to defeat Dean Heller.
That's right.
The Republican. But they did. As you see, Jackie Rosen there will be the new senator from Nevada. But there were 3 anti-Kavanaugh votes among the Democrats who all lost, and that would be Claire McCaskill in Missouri, Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, and Joe Donnelly in Indiana. So there was a Kavanaugh effect in the U.S. Senate. And there will be a greater number of senators, regardless of what happens with the couple races that are still out. Tester is slightly behind in Montana at this point, and Martha McSally has a razor-thin lead in Arizona. We don't know when those will be called, but that will affect the margin too.
So we're looking at maybe 3 additional seats?
Yeah, 3 or 4.
3 or 4?
3 or 4.
Well, that's not too bad.
No, it's enough to, presumably it's enough to have some action on justices of the Supreme Court should that come to.
I think Mitch McConnell as I understand, he's calling him back in for a specific session to confirm a number of appointees to the courts, the lower courts.
Yes, and he has been very, very judicious, we could say, about that issue.
Well, now, what about that thing in Texas? You know, somebody said you've got a conservative Republican state, you're not going to switch it. We thought that Menendez, with all the scandals he had, would go down, and he didn't.
Didn't matter in New Jersey, no. And John James lost was narrowly defeated by Debbie Stabenow in Michigan. There were a lot of close races. Even the Joe Manchin one, which started in the evening, it looked like he was going to win by 18 points. He ended up winning by 3 points. It wasn't much. Morrissey came, pretty close. So they had a series of close races. It could have gone higher, but in this case, it didn't.
Do you think Manchin may shift? I mean, I really like him. He's a terrific guy.
Yeah, I don't know what it would take for him to do that, a committee chairmanship or something like that. But as you have mentioned on the air, there is precedence for West Virginia Democrats switching parties.
Well, the governor switched, yeah, absolutely.
And I don't know how comfortable he's going to be having to line up with West Virginia values and at the same time, follow Chuck Schumer's lead in the Senate. That could be a tough tightrope to walk.
Well, any other thoughts about where we're going from here? What happened to Virginia, by the way? It was just...
Virginia is becoming a pretty solidly blue state, and I think that the whole entrenchment of federal government and the liberalization based on, the urban growth in Northern Virginia and here in Hampton Roads is changing the demographics of things. I do think, Pat, that people voted for divided government. That's what they voted for, and people who travel in airports beginning in 2019 are going to have to listen to CNN doing covering hearings on Trump's business dealings for the last 40 years, and this is what the electorate voted for.
Well, they got a fellow named Eric Cantor. He was majority leader of the United States House of Representatives, and he was a tremendous leader. So a group of dissidents said, well, he doesn't care enough about us. And so in an off election, they dumped him out, put Brett in. Brett comes in. He loses the seat in the 7th district of Richmond.
District.
The lady up in Northern Virginia.
Barbara Comstock.
There was a strong supporter of Trump, the Republican, and they went against her. What did they call it? Trump. They gave her a name, And took her. The 10th district took her out.
And
then
Scott Taylor.
In the 2nd district, Scott Taylor, Elaine Lurie ran an incredible campaign. But more than anything, the Democrats picked for their Senate candidate a man who had strange ties to racism and the Old South and the KKK and all that.
The Republicans.
Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they had a man named Nick Rears who was a Superman, a former combat warrior. I mean, a terrific guy. he got beat by this fellow in the Northern Virginia, and he lost substantially to Tim Kaine, who should have been beat.
Right. There was a real problem with fielding candidates, and even the candidates who were relatively strong ones. I mean, Dave Bratt was a good congressman, and it went right down to the wire. I mean, it was a very, very narrow loss. But you know, that's such is life in Virginia right now. You know, it's the days of Jim Gilmore and big margins in the House and House of Delegates are, you know,
anyhow, that's
over.
That's the way it is. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'll keep our eyes open on what's happening. But it really, you can say it was a win for Trump when it was all finished. I mean, you know, he
invested a lot personally in running race after race after race. He went to so many states and did achieve what he set out to do.
Well, certainly in Florida, major thing. All right. Well, CBN chief political analyst David Brody joins us now from Washington. And David, talk about the evangelical vote. You heard what was said about if they'd been raptured in Florida, the Republicans would have lost. What about that?
Pat, I have to tell you, look, when evangelicals show up, candidates win, especially when they show up in droves. And that's what we saw last night in specific states. For example, in the Senate, look at the 3 states that flipped. We had Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota. In all 3 of those states, evangelicals overperformed. And here's what I mean by that. The national average, the evangelicals made up 26% of the national electorate, 26% of the national electorate. But if you actually go into each one of those states that I just mentioned, Indiana, 40%. Evangelicals made up 40% of the electorate. Missouri, 38%. North Dakota, 37%. And what happened? Goodbye, Heidi Heitkamp. Goodbye, Joe Donnelly. And goodbye, who's the other guy? I've just forgot. North Dakota, Indiana, Missouri. Claire McCaskill. Yeah. So, look, I mean, that's the bottom line. And so I think that has been it's been a huge night, or was a huge night, for the evangelical vote. But remember, nationally, that figure is 26%. In other words, 26% of the electorate was evangelical. And I have to tell you, Pat, because of that, there were problems in the House. Because in 2014, the national evangelical electorate was also 26%, and they needed to do better than that overall, and that's why there were some problems in the House.
Well, how is the White House responding to the results of this election? Have you talked to anybody?
Well, yeah, I mean, my phone was blowing up all night, so to speak, from senior White House officials who are pretty happy, actually, overall. Yeah, they lost the House, but they are very excited about that they're going to grow their majority in the Senate. And let's be honest, did anybody ever predict that the Republicans would have potentially 55 seats in the Senate? No one was predicting that. Now, I will tell you privately that some White House officials that didn't want to go on the record with it before the elections, but I can probably say it now, they were thinking they might get to 55. And guess what? If Arizona and Montana happen, Martha McSally out in Arizona, the Republican there, and if John Tester, the Democrat, loses in Montana, they'll get to 55. And so that is huge. So the White House, very happy with the fact that this blue wave that we heard so much about, well, it started in the House, but then all of a sudden the blue wave, you talked about it being a blue stream, because what happened was it kind of came crashing down on this sandy red beach called the Senate. And that's what happened.
What do you think? I was suggesting that they could call both Senate and House back into session and pass a repeal of Obamacare and a replacement measure, which I think they've already had one in the House. And the president signs it into law. The Democrats in the House couldn't take that away.
Well, they could do it, for sure. I don't get a sense that they will. I think Trump will, believe it or not, extend the olive branch for a little while. Now, with Donald Trump, it could be a day and a half. But they'll try it, I think, at the beginning, for sure. But, you know, Donald Trump with a press conference on Thursday, or today's Wednesday, excuse me, that he's going to have, my guess is he'll start out with some conciliatory language, and then, boom, we're back on. And it doesn't surprise me, Pat, that in a divided nation that we had a divided outcome on Tuesday night. No surprise at all. And I got to tell you, I personally think this is a big win for Trump. Look, they're going to grow their majority in the Senate, and now what do they have? Now, Donald Trump, when he runs in 2020, will have a foil to play against. That'll be House Democrats. Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, and talk about some of those chairmen. You mentioned Gerald Nadler now going to be chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. Adam Schiff, we know all about him. He's going to be head of the House Intelligence Committee. And then, of course, Maxine Waters, and we definitely know about her. She'll be chairman of the House Finance Committee. Could you imagine Donald Trump in the Twitter feed on that? Get ready, Pat.
Well, what do you think? I mean, is he setting up? How soon is he setting up for the presidential run? That's going to be the big thing that's coming up next.
Yeah, it's already pretty much in place. I mean, he's technically made that announcement that he's already running technically. So, yeah, they'll start that. There'll be some White House. You'll hear in the media that there's going to be this big White House shakeup coming. Pat, you know the deal. It's not a shakeup. All White Houses do this. So, yeah, there'll be some turnover for sure. But, look, 2020 starts today. And the reason I say that is because when Donald Trump has that press conference, he's going to be already laying out a little bit about what he wants to get accomplished in the next few years. And already the Democrats, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, many others, are already going to start talking about 2020, or at least if they don't talk about it, they sure will be pseudo-talking about it, if you will. So it's on, Pat. Game on.
Well, the Democrats, with that last one, with Elizabeth Warren, and, of course, Bernie Sanders, they are so far to the left, and it looks like the American people don't buy that. I don't understand what their game is going to be coming up the next 2 or 3 years.
Well, it's a good point, Pat, and you kind of bring up a larger macro picture of the Democrats shifting to the left here. They have to figure out who they are as a party, and I think that's a big deal. And this is where overreach may be a problem, because we've heard so much about if Democrats control the House, that impeachment may start to happen, or at least, you know, they'll talk about that, or subpoena after subpoena will happen. They'll ask the White House for document upon document and all of that. And my guess is all of that will, definitely the subpoenas will happen for sure. But the question is, when does it become too much? In other words, when does it become overreach for the Democrats and they just look fully obstructionist, and Donald Trump can use them as a foil? And more importantly for Democrats, if you want to win back some of those independents in the middle and some of those Democrats that voted for Trump in 2016, you've got to be very, very careful that you don't just cater to the liberal base, because if you're playing for 2020, the obstructionist label is not one that you need right now.
Brilliant. David, thank you so much, and we look forward to more of your commentary. God bless you.